Hello students, this lesson will be about long sentences. You're going to practice identifying the subject and main verb of sentences. In a previous lesson, we learned about complex sentences. And in complex sentences, there are dependent clauses that start with words like who, that, which, whose, and whom. Those are words that begin an adjective clause, or that start with these words here, such as after, before, because, and so forth. These are words that begin adverb clauses. These different words here will begin clauses. They'll be at the beginning of a clause that is a dependent clause. But what we're going to do today is we're going to find the part of the sentence that is the independent clause. Now, what makes it easier is if we can eliminate the words that are part of the dependent clauses. When we eliminate those words, what we'll have left is the main sentence. And then from there, we'll find the subject and the main verb. So let's begin. Looking at this sentence, the students who were studying while sending and receiving instant messages had lower grades and lower academic performance. So first of all, we're looking for these words to see if any of these words appear in the sentence. Yes, I see the word who. Who indicates that there is a clause, who were studying, is telling us more about the students. What kind of students? The ones who were studying. Now, if we look here, we see the word while. While is in this list. It's right here. And it is also the beginning of a clause. So we have who we're studying, which tells us more about the students. And then we have while, which tells us when they were studying. They were studying while sending and receiving instant messages. So we're going to underline this too. Now, once we've underlined those, we have eliminated our dependent clauses. Now what we have left is the students had lower grades and lower academic performance. If we actually took this part out, this is what we would have left. The students had lower grades and lower academic performance. Well, lower grades is something you can have. The grades is a noun, and lower is the kind of grades. So they had lower grades, that's an adjective and a noun, and they had lower academic performance. That's two adjectives. Lower and academic tell us about their performance, which is another noun. So these are the two things they had. And we can take out the, because the is just simply telling us about the students. Which students? The students. If we take out all of that, here's what we have left. We have students had. So this would be the subject, students, and this would be the verb, had. So these would be our subject and main verb of this sentence. Okay, let's look at this example. Before she left for Bogota, Sigal contacted Jeffrey Craig, who studies epigenetics at Murdoch Children's Research Institute in Australia. So we want to look for words that are either relative pronouns or subordinating conjunctions that introduce adverb clauses. So we see the word before. Here's the word before. Here's the word before. So this is starting a clause. Before she left for Bogota. The comma here gives me a hint that this is the end of the clause. Okay, so we're going to eliminate that. Seagal contacted Jeffrey Craig, who, okay, there's the who again, who studies epigenetics at Murdoch Children's Research Institute in Australia. So it looks to me, this whole thing is telling us more about Jeffrey Craig. Who is it that does this? Jeffrey Craig. It's always going to come right after the noun that it's talking about. So if we eliminate that, here's what we have left. Seagal contacted Jeffrey Craig. Now, Jeffrey Craig is not the verb. It's who Seagal contacted. So we're not going to count this as the subject. It can't be the subject, and it can't be the main verb. So here's what we have left. We have Seagal as our subject. We have contacted as our main verb. Let's look at another example. In this sentence, we start with the word Bouchard. Bouchard is the name of a person. And it says Bouchard was influential. Influential is an adjective that is used to describe Bouchard. What kind of person was he? He was influential. Bouchard was influential in convincing his fellow researchers, as well as the public, that some significant part of who we are is influenced by DNA, which was hardly a given when he started his work. So Bouchard was influential, and then this part here, in convincing his fellow researchers, tells us more about his influence. It tells us more about how he was influential. So this is actually giving us more information about this adjective. So this is a prepositional phrase that is modifying this adjective influential. So we're going to eliminate that. And then it says, as well as the public. The public were also influenced by him. As well as means also. So he convinced his fellow researchers, and he also convinced the public. So we're going to eliminate that because it's still telling us about how he was influential. Now we have this clause that starts with that. Here's the word that. And so we were looking for words that begin dependent clauses. We have that, and here is that. That some significant part of who we are is influenced by DNA. That whole chunk right there is a clause that starts with that. And then we have another clause here that starts with which. We have this word which. Which was hardly a given, and so we'll underline that. And then we have a clause here, when he started his work. We have when down here. So this is another clause. So when we underline all of these clauses that are dependent, what do we have left? We have Bouchard was influential. Now we're looking for the subject and the main verb. So we have Bouchard, that's our subject, and the verb is was. And there you go. Okay, let's look at another example. The meta-analysis published this spring in Nature Genetics, which examined 50 years of studies of twins, arrived at a conclusion about the impact of heredity and environment on human beings' lives. To start with, we already know that the word the is not going to be the subject or the main verb. So we can eliminate that already. Next, we have meta-analysis. Meta-analysis published. This looks like this could be the verb. But what is published? What is the published talking about? The meta-analysis was published this spring in Nature Genetics is really what this is saying. Now here's what happened. The author didn't put in the words that was published because this part is understood. It was a way of shortening the sentence. But really, this part here is telling us more about the meta-analysis. Which meta-analysis are we talking about? The one that was published this spring in Nature Genetics, which is a journal. Okay, so this whole clause here is an adjective clause telling us more about the meta-analysis, so we're going to eliminate that. Now we have the word which. Well, that tells us that we probably have another adjective clause coming up. Let's see what it says. Which examined 50 years of studies of twins. Yes, this clause here is telling us more about Nature Genetics. It's telling us more about this journal that publishes different studies. So we're going to eliminate that because that's another adjective clause. Now let's continue with the sentence. Arrived at a conclusion about the impact of heredity and environment on human beings' lives. So arrived could possibly be the verb. What is this? At a conclusion. Well, that's where they arrived at. So we're going to underline that because that's a prepositional phrase telling us more about where they arrived. Here we have about the impact of heredity and environment. That is another prepositional phrase telling us more about the conclusion. So we're going to underline that. And then we have on human beings' lives. Another prepositional phrase, and that phrase is telling us more about the impact. So when we have eliminated all of these clauses and prepositional phrases, what do we have left? Arrived, which is a verb, and meta-analysis, which is our subject. So our subject, meta-analysis, and main verb, arrived, would be the answer.